So today I'm joined by Gino McKoy, who is an artist, film director, screenwriter, songwriter, and producer, and he's able to accomplish all those. His music was featured in 2006 FIFA World Cup, as well as in 2007 Cricket World Cup in Jamaica. He's also the Chief Creative Officer at Goldove Entertainment. Welcome, Gino.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you for having me on the program. That's quite a lot to introduce me on.
Yes. Now, my understanding is that you come from a family of bankers, and rightly so. You initially started out your career as a banker, and I guess a lucrative position. At what point did you figure out that maybe finance and banking wasn't your cup of tea?
I think I knew that all along, even throughout my university years at University of Toronto. I think, I wanted to actually get, a little financial experience because I was in a Bachelor of Commerce program. So I specialized in economics at U of T. So I was doing a lot of like the banking part-time, and then I decided after university that it really wasn't for me. Even though I was good at it, I felt that, I wanted to pursue something that I was really passionate about and that I love. I couldn't see myself in the long term really staying in that career in terms of commerce and finance and economics. So I felt like, I need to pursue my passion and do something that I love. And that was basically music. And also it evolved into film as well, because growing up, I used to write a lot of short stories and poetry. And I lean towards the writing. And sometimes when you're out in Hollywood, especially when you're doing music, you realize that both go hand in hand. Because it's either you make movies out here or you make music. So it's kind of one of those type of towns. So I decided to pursue like the film as well because I had a great love for film as a child. So Star Wars being one of my big films. Feature films that I saw as a kid and, watched that all the time, since I was about 3 years old with my parents and stuff. So it was something that, I easily transitioned into. I think it was good that I had a discipline, had a background, in the university, from University of Toronto, and having that commerce and political science background and everything else. So that helped me a lot with like, adapting to the music industry and realizing that it's a business, and also the film industry is a business. And, not only using like, your left brain or your right brain, and being able to use both, I would say, to get the most out of both industries.
So I want to come back to your point about using the left brain and the right brain. But first, when you first told your parents, and this is, again, when you were young, told them that you want to quit your banking job and to pursue the arts and music, what was their response?
Actually, my mom urged me to quit. She actually said to me, she wanted me to go into something that I loved, and that music, and I had the talent for it, and I should quit the banking and just go full-fledged into it. My dad's a musician growing up, so he's one of the composers on the songs with me. So he's a keyboardist. My mom also has a music background, and both our families actually have music backgrounds. So it's kind of like they had no problem with me going into it. They know it's going to be an uphill battle, and, not a lot of people like get that, stability, right off the bat. But, I was really urged by my parents to go ahead and do that. So I did.
Well, you were very, very lucky. I was expecting to hear you say that your parents said that you were not good in banking, so you should go into music. But I'm glad to hear that they were very supportive, and they're also musicians as well. Now, speaking of being both side of the hemisphere brain, is that you not only write, direct, produce, but also the films that you develop also features your original music as well. How is that possible?
Well, it's a funny story. When I first came to Hollywood and I was considering signing with one of the major labels out in Los Angeles, one of the things I said to myself was a lot of the executives were trying to push me into like genres of music I didn't really want to do. I'm traditionally, I like going into live music. I like pop rock. I like stuff like, from Michael Jackson to Sting to, different type like Freddie Mercury. Like I wanted to go into more of that type of live pop rock type of music. And they were trying to push me into something else, and I decided I didn't want to do that. So I decided to come up with a plan where I would now integrate my feature films into my music. And how I would do that was I ended up writing a script based on one of my songs, and that was the first script I did in Hollywood, which attracted some really big names like Sir Ben Kingsley and Tyrese Gibson. A lot of big names, A-list actors were attached to that script, actually. And I decided that what I'm going to do is create a film and then put my music in that film and use the marketing of the film to promote my music. And at that time, I was one of the first actual writers, screenwriters at that point in time, because I wasn't directing at that point, that actually created a film and was producing it just specifically to put music in it as well. But it happened to be commercial features, and the agencies from like CA and the top agencies in Los Angeles both, they loved the script and everything else. So it ended up doing really well in terms of like when it went out to the agencies. But what happened was it got delayed because my lead was, she got pregnant and a lot of things changed. So I decided to do one of my other features because it was easier to get off at that point in time and do the same thing. So my whole methodology is basically all my feature films that I write and produce or direct will have my songs in it. And that's like a good marketing vehicle for my music.
So clearly, as I'm listening, I mean, your methodology is very unusual, very unconventional, because the means by which you achieve the ends is very unusual. Having a feature film is difficult enough, and having a soundtrack and a music release is difficult enough. But you use both difficult and very complex things to support one another, but ultimately the music came first. But it's interesting that while you were actually trying to do that, you created this script. So I just want to kind of dig a little bit deeper in terms of, you have your song, your piece that you've written, and you're trying to create this film to support it. How do you go about writing a script that supports that music?
Well, first I write the script, and then I see exactly what songs fit into the actual script itself. Certain scenes, like one of the scenes I wrote in Lumina, basically is, it revolves around, the underlying story is a love story, revolves around a guy that's going to inevitably save his girlfriend, Mm-hmm. And from the beginning of it, basically when he loses her, we see the more sentimental part of it, and basically I put in one of my love songs in there. So a love ballad. So I was able to fit that in. And then another scene, it was basically an action scene and everything else. So I fit in more of my, faster paced rock songs, pop rock songs, that would fit into that actual scene itself. I guess sometimes you have to have the type of mindset to understand what the scene calls for in terms of the music. So in a sense, you need to be kind of like a music supervisor, where you would have to see, what really dictates in this scene and what type of music is needed in this. Like, is score music needed, or are you going to use a title track to actually use in that particular scene? Because you don't you don't want your scene to come off like it's jarring, where you have a particular scene that, doesn't match with the music. So I tried to create something that will match with the music.
Right. So that I completely get. But I think initially what you said was you had written the music first, or maybe I misunderstood. And then
I wrote the film first. The film was written first.
You wrote the film first, and then based on that, you wanted to have your music featured in the film, but you started with the script, and then from there you said, okay, what is the most appropriate accompanying music that will go with those particular scenes? Okay, now that makes a lot of sense to me. Now, as you write the script as well as the music, are you one of those types where you are able to visualize things in your mind, or able to just kind of sense it?
I visualize it in my mind. I normally try to cut the film before it actually finishes. So what I do is I normally see the scenes in my mind and see how it's playing out. And then from that particular instance, before I write it, because I'm very descriptive when I write action and stuff like that, when I'm very descriptive even when I write dialogue, I can see the actors actually speaking. in my mind. So at that particular point, then I visualize the scene, and then basically I visualize how the actors are interacting in the scene and how that scene plays out. And then in my mind, I'm like, okay, what song is going to fit good in here? What song is going to really jive with that scene? You know, what makes that scene powerful? What makes that scene, you know, what would the audience actually, how could they like really encapsulate or capture like the real essence of that scene? And I would just think about songs I have and see exactly the songs I've written, because we've written so many, and try to place it in the scene.
People sometimes forget the role that media plays, and media and entertainment. They're not only meant to provide information or just pure entertainment. It is actually a facet of their profession to upheld certain beliefs and values of democracy and making sure that there is transparency. And that transparency that you're talking about sometimes tends to be obfuscated because of self-interest of the industries as well as the political system. So if the journalists and if the filmmakers don't bring the truth to the limelight, and movies as an example, a large medium as well as music is a huge distribution medium. If you don't use this to influence and affect people for good, then, you know, aside from the entertainment value, what are you bringing to humanity? So I thank you for your message of this, you know, message that as storytellers, there is a responsibility that you have to undertake. The other piece of it you mentioned is that because artists and celebrities are in the limelight and they are very much followed by the masses, that it's important for them to set the precedence and be the role model and to speak up for the things that is important so that others come on board and join that movement as well. So thank you for that. I did want to ask you, because I think you had some perspectives around the role that government should play in the context of climate change. What are your viewpoints?
Because of the nature of how the environment's going right now, in terms of like so many endangered species, the greenhouse gas emissions increasing at an exponential rate, deforestation playing about 11% of the actual, you know, global greenhouse gases emissions that we have right now. I think that governments, in terms of like how they approach different things, like for example, like we have groups that basically will be lobbyists for governments that are contributing to these greenhouse gases. And now you have like, you know, both people that are environmentalists and people that are trying to promote climate change for the better, you know, are having these clashes with those private corporations that, you know, tend to support governments that they want in particular positions to ensure their longevity in that business, despite the, you know, environmental degradation that it's causing. Now, the only way to get around certain things like that is, I feel, a lot of it has to do with people demanding more alternative forms of energy. Like, for example, especially in developing countries right now, they went from, you know, from the 60s, 70s, and even late into the 90s and 2000s, certain countries went from even continuing on to staying on leaded gas as compared to going to unleaded gas. Excuse me. Like, for example, in the Caribbean, they were on leaded gas for a number of years, which was creating a lot of CO2 emissions in the actual air and the environment, and creating bad breeding environments, especially with smog and other things like that, until they decided to go unleaded. All that could have been avoided had the governments foreseen, well, why don't we go electric? You know, like right now, we have certain things that, like, you know, there's certain that they used to have, you know, a tax incentive in California to actually buy an electric car. That's no longer the case anymore. In the Caribbean, for example, because I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago, they had, you know, no taxes on bringing in imported electric cars like Tesla and so forth, which would improve the environment substantially in terms of the air that they breathe. And now there's a tax on it. So, governments that impose those things because they want to make more money, because they have, a certain stake in the oil industry, tend to create a bad, I would say, they become like the perpetrator of like something that we need to cut down on, in terms of like, they're like the main perpetrator of these greenhouse gases. And in order for governments to improve on that, we need to have people that, could push for the alternative forms of energy. And I know we have certain senators and certain certain representatives and House representatives in the United States that are pushing for that. But I think it needs to be a great effort in part by the people. Governments won't respond unless something happens significant. And it's a united effort from the people itself, from the populace. So the populace needs to come together and talk about it, and it needs to be taken seriously. And one of the things is education reform. And part of that is showing kids, and not only kids, but also adults like ourselves and older generations, that how important this is. It's not a joke. It's not something that, okay, well, if the temperature rises by a degree or 2 degrees, it doesn't mean anything, in the world climate. It means a lot. It changes the entire ecological system, from like, the fish to the birds to everything else. So like, we need to really take part in like not only education reform and push for education reform with the governments, but also push for alternative forms of energy, cleaner forms of energy, like, cold fusion, like electric, like other things that are not going to contaminate the environment. Especially with the deforestation, I think that people should be pushing towards a paperless environment. Like what's going to happen in Brazil, which I'm really scared of, is the fact that Bolsonaro is probably going to take part in the mass deforestation to supply the cattle industry in Brazil. And everyone knows that the lungs of the earth basically is the Amazon rainforest. And if that's mostly gone, then that's going to create even a bigger problem for the people. And a lot of people are not focusing on that because, oh yeah, well, Brazil is not my country. I have other things to focus on. Like, countries are now partaking in, okay, well, we're going to get stuck in this materialistic type of mindset where, all we're going to be chasing down is basically money and trying to build our economies without looking at the consequences of it, and looking at the consequences of like certain other governments that have been, placed in power now that, could directly affect them. And a lot of people don't realize that because they don't have the education to see it. So like, sometimes people are not educated in that aspect, like the normal person. Like if you speak to them and you talk to like people about it and you're like, well, this average person, like, okay, what do you think about, Bolsonaro's election in Brazil and the fact that he's going to deforest most of the Amazon rainforest to supply the cattle industry and also to extract oil? And they'll be like, well, how does that affect me? I'm like, well, it affects the entire planet. So, I feel that, governments have that power to like cut down on that, but the only time they will is when people speak out in numbers.